with us on promoting this on Twitter. If you then retweet it from my tweet, that would be greatly appreciated so we get people following. So give us 1 second to do that.
I'll take them. Sorry.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So, an intense afternoon of discussions on neo-idealism in all of its facets. 3 closed working groups off the record on defending liberal democracy, renewing liberal democracy, and spreading liberal democracy. We have people from each of those groups on our panel now to talk back and talk back, but to say how we take things forward, actually, in each of those fields. So, joining us are Benedetta Berti from NATO, Paul Mason, author and journalist, former economics editor of Newsnight, Alexandra Matvichuk, who is known as one of the recipients of the organization that won the Nobel Peace Prize last year, Martin Bukalek, who's director of European, and Jessica Toll, who's Labour Foreign Policy Chair Group and candidate running for the Labour Party in the next general election. So thank you all for joining us today. Journalists focusing on general politics will be moderating this discussion. So asking for 3 minutes each to start off with. Benedetta, over to you. Your most important takeaways and ways forward.
All right. And Benedetta came from my group over here on defense, so please.
Okay.
I'm excited.
Excellent. There's 2 of us. Great, 3 minutes. I will not do it justice because it was a really rich discussion, but I think we started with the basic point. What do you do to defend liberal democracy? We had some discussions on whether that was the right framework. We agreed that yes, let's go with that question. Point number 1 is to recognize that it's under threat, which may seem banal, but I think one of the discussions we were having was about the threat perception and lack thereof, and how do you build a strategic culture that actually looks at all the different kinetic and non-kinetic tactics that are used in an integrated way by authoritarian competitors and adversaries to undermine our security and democracy, and how do we get better at connecting the dots and seeing the threat picture and recognizing that there is a concerted, deliberate threat to our democracies, and therefore there is a problem, and therefore we need to be active in the business of defending it. So first rule of having a policy is recognize you have a problem, and here we talked about what do we need to do in terms of activating our public, our citizens, in terms of promoting a much more open debate about the threats to democracies and having the strategic culture that you need in order to be proactively defending democracy. So that was part of the, so that was step 1. Then we talked about how defend it from who, against who, because of course you need to know what actors you are up against in order to be effective. And of course we ended up talking mostly about Russia and China. That's not a big surprise. And understanding it, whilst very different, we need to understand their different patterns, strategic calculus, and how they try to leverage what they perceive as the weaknesses in our societies and respond accordingly. Then we talked, I have 3 minutes, so.
Loosely in time.
Yeah, I'm mostly on time, but with the extra minute, I will say that we boiled down into 3 categories of action. One is how do you maintain your heart security, because of course that's essential to project confidence and to have the foreign and security policy that we need. So we had a discussion about defense spending, investing in capabilities, reinvesting in our defense industry, recognizing both the work that has been done and the progress, but also the gaps that remain. That we talked about how to do better when it comes to deterrence below the spectrum, so disinformation, economic coercion, strategic corruption, all that set of pervasive tactics that are again utilized in a, I would say, consistent and deliberate way to seek to undermine our resolve and our in our democratic institutions, and just as importantly, the trust of our citizens in those institutions. We ended up with discussions on economic security as probably one of the most important discussions that we need to have today, especially in Western European countries. Really recognize that some of the trade-offs that we did in the past between economic prosperity and securities have not worked that well for us. Learn those lessons and perhaps not repeat those errors when it comes to importing new strategic dependencies, say, for example, from China. Finally, we had a word about societal resilience, and now that's where it all starts, something that we can see very well when we look at the Ukrainian example, the importance of actually thinking about society in defense in an integrated way in which all citizens have a role to play when it comes to defending them and their democracy. And for many of our citizens, society in Europe, we need to wake up and recover from that peace dividend era and democracy dividend era that we took, that led us to take both for granted, and now perhaps we're paying the price. So that was a last point, because our adversaries are on the offensive. When we think about defending democracy, we cannot just think about resilience and defense. We also need to think about forward defense and being proactive and shaping the environment, because that's the way our adversary work. There was a lot more smarter things that others said, but that's all I got.
Thank you so much, Benedetta. That sounds like an incredibly rich discussion, and there's going to be plenty of time to develop more of those points during this conversation. A lot of that also touches on what we talked about in the group on renewing liberal democracy, and this notion of taking it from forward defense to actually what do we have to offer. Actually, how do we make that offer? And that links to the third group, of course, on spreading liberal democracy as well. But really renewing that sense of what it is that makes liberal democracy. Why does it actually have something to say? What is the kind of society that we need to build that deserves defending? As this actually was a key part of our discussion. So Paul Mason, I'm going to ask you to come in on that, please.
Well, thank you.
And on your takeaways.
Yeah, I'll speak more about the takeaways of how do we push this forward, this as a project. There's plenty of people who can chime in, and many of the themes were what you've already discussed. For me, if someone wants to label me a neo-idealist, I'm happy. But my own self-description, as part of a social democrat, is I'm an idealist in a realist world. That is, I think there is a what is, and there is what ought to be, and that they are different. That there is a structure of international law, of international government, of universal human rights, which still exists, but beneath it, the world is already moving to the dynamic that our systemic competitors have created. It is no longer moving to the dynamic that the West created after 1945. And I think the starting point is to recognize that reality. State what is. That is what is happening. The second thing is, so the dynamic of the world is already multipolar, but not perfectly multipolar. The second thing is, multipolarity is chaos. We need to win that argument. The idea, one of my favorite multipolar propagandists is Vijay Prashad of the Tricontinental Institute, recently outed by the New York Times as being part of a pro-PRC influence network. All his description of what the multipolar world is a nice sort of Nkrumahite coexistence between three different belief systems. What it is, in fact, is a step away from order. It is Nagorno-Karabakh, it's Kosovo, it's Gaza, it's Ukraine. That's what it's going to look like, but worse. The third point, it's chaos and it will worsen. Now, from this, I think the lesson I take from studying the 1930s and 40s is first of all, what was achieved during and after the war was achieved by people who asked, what is the world going to look like when we win? So to have the view that there's something, and it wasn't a vague set of ideas. On the Friday seminar, I spoke about René Cassin, the author of the Universal Declaration, who spent 20 years establishing in jurisprudential thought the principles of placing the individual at the heart of international law. So it's that kind of work that we need to do. Keynes and Harry Dexter White on the economic order. It's that kind of question. But in order to land the answer to that, well, let's remember what the difference is. In 1945, there were 2.3 billion people in the world. Asia, the biggest population, 50%. Europe, the second biggest, 23% of the world when the war ended. Today, Asia is still the biggest. Africa is the second. Africa, who speaks for Africa in the world stage? And of course, at the end of the war, agency was all in the global north. Today, there is much agency in the global south. So this is my final point, any act of convincing, such as the act of convincing that took place in the Universal Declaration, the foundation of the European Convention, all those acts of convincing will have to be acts of convincing done in Chinese, to Chinese intellectuals who we nurture and convince through facts as well as moral arguments that international government, international law, and a new universal concept of human rights have to be the outcome. That's what it will look like if we win. I think it's going to be a long discussion, but at least if you go into the coming chaos wanting it to happen, as our party did, Clement Attlee went into the wartime coalition saying, at the end of this war, there's got to be world government, Winston. If you do that, you have a chance of achieving something.
Thanks so much, Paul. And this notion of having a vision and having an objective, which will then enable you to find the means we need to achieve it and marshal the resources we need to get there, is at the heart of the discussion we've been trying to have. This is what it means to have a grand strategy for the future of liberal democracies. And so actually getting to that set of it is really, really a good thing we've been able to talk through in this session. Aaron.
Yeah, so, and actually, I want to come back very quickly to our group for a quick minute, because one thing that we did discuss in our group that we came out with the saying, again, the best defense is a good offense. So a part of defending democracy, and one of the best ways to defend it is actually to spread it. And to be, project your self-confidence by being, by saying this is still a model that is worth emulating. This is still a model that is worth spreading. There are still attractive bits about this model, and there's still places in the world that want this model. And of course, that is the subject of the third group with Alexandra Matwiczuk. And I'd like to ask, does this ring true? Is this are these things interlinked in terms of spreading and defending democracy? Can you do both of these things at the same time?
It's a very good question for Ukrainians who have successfully achieved two tasks. First, win war with Russia, and second, provide democratic reforms during the large-scale war. So I think that in our example, it illustrates the complexity of this question. Returning to the work of our group, we discuss the spreading of democracy. And in order to spread values, you have to be a clear example. And that is why in this regard, we discuss a lot the issue of Russian war against Ukraine and reaction of international community to this war. Because when large-scale invasion started, the civilized world told, let's help Ukraine not to fail. And Ukraine obtained the first serious weapon to be able to defend itself. And first serious sanctions against Russia were introduced into force. But this is a time to change this narrative to another one. Let's help Ukraine to win. There is a significant difference between let's help Ukraine not to fail and let's help Ukraine to win fast. And we can measure this difference practically in types of weapons, in speed of decisions, in gravity of sanctions. Because this is not just a war between two states. This is a war between two systems, authoritarianism and democracy. And if we want democracy to spread, we have to demonstrate that democracy can win wars. And we can look to the opposite scenario. What will be if Russia succeeds? It will encourage authoritarian leaders in other parts of the world to do the same. The international system of peace and security doesn't work anymore. And this means that democratic governments will be forced to invest their money not in education, healthcare, culture, or business development, not in solving global problems like climate change or social inequality, but in weapons. And if this happens, we will be a witness of an increase of a number of nuclear states, the emergence of new robotic armies and new weapons of mass destruction. So if Russia succeeds and this scenario comes true, we'll find ourselves in a world which will be dangerous for everyone without any exception. So that is why the spread of democracy is a very practical meaning. Ukraine has to win. This is our strategy for the next future, because only spread of them make our world safer.
Thanks very much.
I mean, this cuts to the chase. Yeah, this idea of defining the objective, which can then again define the strategy and the means. It's the it in however long it takes, in whatever it takes. What is that it? This is what Gabriela Landsberger said the other day. It has to be Ukrainian victory. Otherwise, we all lose. And that message still hasn't penetrated adequately into some of the halls of most influential power in Europe, not least the Chancellery in Germany.
And actually, I'd like to come to that quickly because Germany is an interesting case when we get to this question of disconnect between elites and public. Actually, we see a certain response or certain action taken by the Chancellor, or indeed by political elites in Germany, that is actually really quite at odds with what most Germans now think, according to public opinion. So I think this is a good time to come to Martin Bokalek about this question of what is the role of the citizenry, and if you have an asset like that, if you have people who are interested in defending and spreading liberal democracy, in standing for the right sort of things, how do you harness that?
Yes, a very good question. First and foremost, I would say that it's not only about how to work with the citizens who are already on your side. The most important point is, of course, to work with all citizens and try to convince them somehow that our side, our way of doing, our values are something what they should stand for. And as we were already discussing also in our roundtable we had there, but also as we see there are like different layers. One is that we must be attractive and we must sort of push for values on the national level. We must attract other countries. In our group, we were discussing different groups of countries and that each of the country needs a different attitude. We were also that we need to really be more proactive in sort of spreading the democracy and sort of support in third countries, in those democratic ones, but also in those kind of on a swinging point, that we must be more proactive or steps forwards to them. And we must have some kind of more concrete campaign and a set of goals what we want to achieve, how we want to continue. As Alexandra was also saying, we need to really lead people and teach people by the example. We must be ruling by the example, and we must be active way. That was also a very important takeaway from our group. So those are some steps, and there will be definitely some more. But to get back to the question of citizens, the biggest problem there is, of course, we will be always like sort of on a weaker side when people will be deciding who to follow. We will be the ones who are limited somehow by the rules, who are limited by our values, and who are limited by citizens. We don't want to spread disinformation. We don't want to spread false narratives, but we want to inform our case. And that's the problem I'm seeing. It's that the communication of governmental sectors in Czechia, but also in other countries, it's not sufficient enough. We are doing well. We are doing a lot of good things, and we barely talk about it. We barely invest in a strategic. So we must do that on that side, but it's not enough. We must, of course, try to somehow make people believe that what we stand for is somehow good, and we will be opposing those who are having a better basic situation because they can use this information. They will try to use it, and they will try somehow to disbalance the support to their side, being the country, being the populist politicians, being the another countries with their influence and so on. And what we can do is that we, of course, still need to play within the rules. We need to respect the rules we set, and we need to stand for that. But we need to really use every possible to somehow compete with it and not even be on the same level and being reactive, but we must proactively be. In my opinion, it's that what is needed is like a sort of cross-stakeholder attitude, governmental and non-governmental organizations together, inter-border cooperation within the EU only, but also with other countries, and also cross-dimensional, cross-dimensional and cross-area cutting. For example, in our case at European, what we are trying to now launch is that we already do for several years some kind of projects and cooperation also with sociological institutes here in Czechia, but also in other V4 countries. And we are trying to do qualitative and quantitative sociological survey and use this kind of knowledge about the citizens in our countries to improve our communication, to improve our activities aimed for citizens and engaging citizens. But now we want to go even one step further, and we are starting a project with National Institute for Mental Health here in Czechia. And they have a leading psychiatrist and psychologists, and they are focusing on the cognitive warfare with us. So they are like focusing on how the human brain works, if there's a malign influence, if there is disinformation coming to human brain, and what does the brain work there. And I can of course go so much deep because I don't understand it as much as they do, but also using that kind of knowledge and trying to use it in countermeasures against these malign influences and against disinformation and so on. This is exactly the cross-dimensional work I'm talking about, which is very needed to, as I said, not trying to keep up with other countries, but being one or two steps forward and being proactive.
Absolutely, Martin. It's great to hear such innovative initiatives, actually, which I'm sure we all, and mutual learning between liberal democracies when we get things right has to happen. But for that to happen, we have to tell those stories as well and make each other aware. So that's very much an important part of that. And it was something that came up in our group time and again, and Caroline was particularly emphasizing that we need to be able to have positive stories to tell so that we continue to have legs to stand on in future. Jessica, as well as disinformation and people targeting that, there have been some instances where liberal democracy has gone awry and people have legitimate complaints, and there's no why some people have been alienated from our systems. And we talked about this quite a lot in our group, in the basis of economic inequality, for example. What were your thoughts on that, the main takeaways?
Thank you, Ben. Yeah, it's been really interesting to hear the conversation so far about the sort of international relations and external impacts of some of the discussions we're having, because obviously we're all here because the concept of neo-idealism emerged in the context of real existential threat to liberal democracy on the borders of Europe. And it challenged morning about it being like a marriage, you know, you continually have to work on it. Because in the background, there's been this slow attrition. You know, we're very far from the days of real positive optimism and inevitability around globalization, democracy. And that liberal, which included liberal economics, has made a big swathes of our populations feel like they've been left behind, and they have genuine grievances about that. They haven't benefited in the ways that we thought everybody would. So the opportunity for this agenda for me really is around our looking internally and looking at our own systems and processes and governments, because none of us are perfect, and on getting our own houses in order, because there has been internal democratic backsliding. I use the examples of the UK introducing legislation to clamp down on trade union activity, on protest. We've seen sort of press freedoms go backwards in a lot of places. You know, China has criticized the US over Black Lives Matter, whilst they're also trying to press ahead on agenda internationally. And then we have threats like disinformation really skewing the conversation. So I think the opportunity is that as like-minded countries, we have the opportunity to work together to fix some of these problems, and to strengthen our democracies together, you know, learning from best practice with each other, working together to ease some of the immense challenges we will face in the future as well as now, you know, economic inequality, wealth inequality, security, the green transition, technological development. Even migration was talked about earlier, you know, managing migration. How do we mitigate these challenges? And it's best practice, it's education, it's regulation, it's investing in industries, all of those things where we can really learn from one another. And this is so important because we're all here because we believe liberal democracy is the best way to safeguard our national security, the prosperity of our populations, and see us all thrive. By strengthening ourselves, we put ourselves in the best possible position to make liberal democracies aspirational for other countries as well. And that, by leading by example, makes the best possible case that we could ever do in terms of our relationships beyond this little club of people we have here. So, you know, this will not be easy. It will require long-term thinking to counter short-term political narratives that are quite destructive. It will require robust defense of our democratic values, and it also will require a vision and a message of hope for the future. So Ukrainian fragility has sort of brought this all into sharp relief, but it's brought values back into the conversation about how we move forward internally and internationally. And we need to be confident about talking about that.
We do, and while it was Ukrainian fragility that brought it into stark relief, what we can do about it was brought into even starker relief by Ukrainian strength and Ukrainian resilience and determination not to bow down to these threats and to actually hold firm in the face of the strongest dangers imaginable, which we haven't faced in many of our, but we have yet to even come close to facing up to in a similarly impressive way. We have plenty of questions to continue that going, but I'll hand over to Aaron first.
Yeah, I do have one question for our panel first before we open it up to the floor here. And I'm going to perhaps pose a question that I wanted to ask you this morning, actually, because we were talking earlier about the fact that liberal democracies do in fact know how to do long-term thinking, do in fact know how to do visions. We do have a history of actually being able to do this, and as we said, we are sitting in the Prague of Václav Havel. We were many of us, of course, yesterday were in Berlin, the site of the wall falling. All of these things are down to the fact that there is the capacity in liberal democracies for long-term thinking, for strategy, and you know, for dedication to a goal to eventually prevail. Yet we seem to have, lost our knack for doing this. So how do we find it again?
Looking to policy planning at NATO for long-term thinking. Benedetta.
Oh, okay, it wasn't a rhetorical. No, it's hard to disagree. Also, I would say that if I have to speak about NATO as an organization, I think over the last, in recent years, we have definitely engaged in thinking about what you would call grand strategy in a way that we hadn't done for essentially since the end of the Cold War. Let's be honest about that. And I think if you look at the latest strategy that NATO put out in 2022, which is our strategic concept, I think there is a vision there. There is a clear threat assessment. It talks about how strategic competition, pervasive instability, recurrent shocks are essentially leading a strategic environment to be the most dangerous and volatile since for generations, and certainly since the end of the Cold War. It talks about advancing authoritarianism as a challenge to our security, to our values, and to our democracies. And it sets out a set of very, I think, ambitious goals. First of all, to rebuild our ability to do deterrence and defense in a way that we hadn't done for decades. Second, to build our own resilience and to work on the resilience of our own partners. It also talks about how to prepare the alliance for the incredibly enormous challenge of strategic competition, from how to counter economic coercion to how to counter disinformation. And of course, he also talks about what is the vision for the Euro-Atlantic, for a Euro-Atlantic peace and stability, which, surprise, surprise, it's about can only come about with a secure, democratic, and independent Ukraine. So there's a lot of elements there. I wouldn't talk about a lack of strategic goals. What we need to do is put the resources and the political will in place to operationalize those and move closer to our stated objectives. But there are objectives there. I think that the political West, the transatlantic community, has still a vision, and sometimes we should be more confident in putting it forward.
Thank you. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Martin.
Short reaction on it, as I was speaking about citizens and citizen support, and so there is a problem also in that we can be coming with visions, we can be having ideas how to go forward, how to do long-term planning, but it's extremely difficult to persuade citizens that they should follow it, and it makes sense because, as we know, and the sociological research also we are doing knows that citizens are usually like requiring some kind of quick, rapid solutions, quick ideas. That's also one of the reasons why they believe populist parties and why they follow leaders who are like promising something in one electoral period, but they are not thinking anyhow further. And this is also what we need to somehow keep in mind when we are coming with the plans, how to include citizens into this planning, and keep in mind also that the citizens are always first and foremost looking for themselves. As there's one, for example, in Czechia, we are the country which is having the biggest number of Ukrainian refugees per capita. Research, we see that the support for Ukraine still persists, however, it's being a little bit lowered, and citizens are still in majority saying that we should be helping Ukrainian refugees. But as long as you start asking the question whether they would be willing to somehow lower their life standards while sort of bringing the Ukrainian refugees here, this number changes very dramatically, and there's a very small number of citizens who are saying, okay, keep on with the support for Ukraine, keep on with the people there. And this is exactly because they are like they are not connecting the dots. They are not seeing that with support of Ukraine, we are also supporting our values, our life standards, and so on. And they are also like first and foremost, of course, quite understandably looking first and foremost for themselves. So if you are coming with ideas, please let's come with ideas which are exactly focused also on how to get the citizens on board.
Well, this is it. I mean, how to actually make those benefits of liberal democracy more tangible to people, and the benefits of defending it and investing in it and renewing it was a big part of our question. I know there are several waiting in the room, but I just want to come to our remaining panelists to come in on this question of the short term and the long term, because this really came up time again in our discussion about how to get that investment, how to actually see these things not as costs but as investments, and then make them tangible. Paul first, then Alexandra, and then Jessica.
The medium term is the route from the short term to the long term, and I think I want to be. There's two things that one of them came up in our discussion, and the other one I think is obvious. It haunts the room in the form of Ukraine. The Ramstein Club, as it were, the Ramstein. What is its official title? The Ramstein Conference is a symbol of NATO and other allies' ability to think long term about Ukraine. That is, that we are going to have to provide long term to the UK if you become an MP, and we win the election. The countries that are doing securonomics should get together in clubs that push to the very limits of the WTO rules what we can do in terms of mutual subsidy, mutual aid, friendshoring. If we do that, that's our route to the long term, to convincing the population that we know where we're going.
Thanks. Securonomics is definitely a term I think that's going to be taken by many coming from this room. Alexandra.
I've written it down already.
It's Rachel
Reeves.
Yeah.
I would like to focus on 3 points. First, I strongly agree that we have to set ambitious goals, and to preserve status quo in our dynamic and very changing world is not an ambitious goal. We can't return past. We have to build a version of future in which we want to live in. Second, when we speak about long-term strategy, we speak about proactive approach. And in my point of view, the well-developed democracies lost this proactivity. Russia was always proactive. Russia created a new strategic reality in our region, presented it as like fait accompli, and pushed the whole international community to accept it. So we have to return this proactivity. This is strategies. Third, we have to base our values, we have to base our political decisions, not just on economical benefits or security issues or some thinking about comfort, but on values. And this is something which we as a human rights defenders speak for decades, but now it's become a reality, because when you close your eyes, what countries did towards their own citizens, it's become a threat to the whole regions.
Thank you. Jessica.
So I think as a political class, we've become very lazy in that we often talk about treating the symptoms of some of the real challenges we have as opposed to the causes. And there are lots of reasons for this like increasingly short-term thinking, and it's not just about electoral cycles. We didn't talk about this, but you know, the 24-hour news cycle has a lot to answer for in this. Social media does, because people are constantly seeking sound bites and looking to have an opinion on everything as soon as it happens. But you know, if we think about the challenges we face going forward and common challenges around the economy, around our security, around green transition, around our social services, etc. Again, we only really talk about the symptoms of why those things are happening and why they're affecting our populations. We're not talking about the change in health dependencies. We're not changing about the way that structures were built for a world that doesn't really exist anymore. You know, instead we'll end up talking about migration, or I don't know. So I think communication, I've written down here as a massive thing. We need to re-establish a narrative around we're all in this together. There needs to be a lot more honest communication about we're facing the challenges that we're facing and why we then have to take the steps that we have to take to deal with them. Yes, there's a growing understanding of the link between how things outside our borders impact inside our borders. Again, we need to make more of that. That makes the case for investment versus cost a lot easier as well. And then I guess the last point again is around citizen education and having that honest conversation about, you know, how our systems work. I think the more that we can have in-depth conversations around that will make a big difference to getting back that political will to think about long-term solutions.
Absolutely, and this is a conversation we've had a lot in Germany since the beginning of the full-scale invasion, which is the need for politicians to communicate with our population as if they were adults, as if they could actually understand the stakes of what's going on, to actually say, this is what's happening to us, these are the threats, the world has changed, we need to change too, here's what we need to do, here's what it's going to cost, and here's why we have to pay it. And actually make that clear and make it, there's no free lunch in this, but the alternative is even worse. So we're going to come to the questions for a room. We have 20 minutes left. Do please keep your interventions short. I'd also be very interested to hear if anyone who wants to say anything on whether they think neo-idealism can spread from its original heartlands. Does it have a future of grip? Thomas Oes is first, then Mark Spike, and then James Nixie. Do please raise your hand or raise your card if you want to speak.
Just like this, and then we can definitely get you.
Okay. Thomas Oes, please.
Yeah, I'd just like to expand a bit on what Alexander said. We're going to talk about long and short-term goals. I think there's one clear short-term goal, and that is the defeat of Russia before November 2024. If we don't do that, all this other stuff is kumbaya. I mean, it really is, because if we don't take Russia out, or that is to say, if Russia is not defeated in the next 13 months, we don't know what will happen, and then the entire process of educating our civil society, carrying the message, all of that will become utterly irrelevant. So but if we do take Russia out, that means that China will be considerably weakened, Iran will be considerably weakened. We must, and so the goal for civil society for us should be to convince the governments of Germany, France, the United States, that we have a window of opportunity to reduce Russia into a pitiful player that deals with its own problems and ceases. That's it.
Thanks, Thomas. Mark Spike, please, and please introduce yourself as you haven't been here the whole time.
Thank you very much. Mark Spike, State Secretary for North Rhine-Westphalia, Germany. I wanted to support the point that Benedetta made, that when it comes to the information space, resilience and defense is important but not sufficient. And take up what Alexandra said, that we need proactive measures, maybe even preemptive measures. And I think therefore it is really needed to coordinate liberal democracy support to actively communicate, to take active measures, as it was called during the Cold War time. But I have a question on the conceptual level here, because if we are going in that direction, wouldn't that turn neo-idealism to neo-conservatism? And can be neo-idealism be successful without turning neocon?
Great question. Thank you. We'll take James Nixie's question as well, and then we'll come back to that. And I'm happy to address that as well as also panelists. James, please.
Yeah, just very quickly, two things. So, but it is related to your point on clarity of objective and Thomas's point as well. The need for a defeat of Russia, the need for a Ukrainian victory. I think there needs to be an adjective in between there, and that is an unambiguous defeat or an unambiguous victory, because I find that a lot of the pushback that I get, we all like it, is when people try to prise that open and they say Ukraine needs some sort of victory. Okay? And there's quite a large gap between some sort of an unambiguous victory. And into that gap you can shove Crimea, and you can shove judicial reckoning, and you can possibly shove some of the Donbass, and you can shove all sorts of things into that gap. So, whilst we're criticizing Biden for, as long as it takes, because it's too ambiguous, and I think we could do a little bit even more clarity than you're offering. But I guess the question that arises from that is how do we convince people that it's not just there needs to be a clear, unambiguous, undisputed, whatever adjective you want to do in there. So that's a question to you, Thomas, or whoever you win. And then can I just this will be the last chance to have the floor. I just would like to bring up the Taiwanese elephant in the room. And I just I'm not looking for directional steer here. Does our newfound ideology, or Martin's only Taiwan, does it imply that we must be as, because I'm aware that the Ukrainians aren't quite as pro-Taiwanese as the Taiwanese are pro-Ukrainian, right? And I'm just wondering if it is incumbent upon us to give as much, in any sense of the word give, to Taiwan as we do, even if that's not enough, to Ukraine. There you go.
Thanks, James. We have another question from Nicola Tenza, so please, Nicola, go ahead. And then do please take your chance now to raise your cards if you have a comment or question, or just throw it on the floor, because then we will come back to our panel after this questions. Nicola, please.
Oh, thank you very much. And well, I'm Nicolas Tanza. I'm a senior fellow at CEPA and also chairman of CERAP and guest professor at Sciences Po in Paris. Well, basically, I have three very short remarks. The first remark is basically we have to speak bluntly. Had the Allies already willed Ukrainian victory, it could have happened.
Yeah.
We could have defeated Russia months ago, and the war could have been finished by the end of 2022. But world leaders did not have this kind of willingness. And they are, from this point of view, guilty for not having saved lives of thousands of Ukrainians. Second point, less dramatically, is about basically, I mean, the state of our own societies, Western societies, both, in the US, Canada, and the EU. We are witnessing the rise of far-right movement, far-right groups, populist movement, or whoever we call them. And the fact is that, of course, Russia and China are magnifying this movement, giving them a lot of credits. But in fact, what are the real roots? The real problem, in my view, is a historical problem, or I will say more precisely, a problem of historical consciousness. That's the state of education in all societies. As I pointed out some days ago, most of the French people of the young generations, or not most, a third of the 40% people do not know about the Holocaust. And that's true in other countries as well. They do not know about the Stalinist period. They do not know about the crackdown of civil liberties and the murders committed by Mao regime during the Great Forwards, Cultural Revolutions, and after that, Tiananmen Square. So that's an issue of it. And the third thing that we were discussing in the panel that I was moderating before are two very concrete proposals, or to build coalitions on 2 points. First point is the questions of basically having a strategy, because we have let Russia basically take the floor and lead the fight. We were not able. So we have to lead a coalition, to create a coalition between most of the major channels, public channels, especially, you know, in the West. And the other side, the other thing is, we are not very serious about the fight against corruptions in most of the Western countries. And that's an issue that is not addressed. And we have also to create a consensus within each society and also between the government. We must also advance common tools, because if there is no common fight against corruption, current tools, current institutions, we won't succeed.
Fully agree, and that's been the point that's come up time and again, actually, in many discussions about this. That again, they need to fix our own roofs, to fix the cracks in our society, to actually change the ideology that led to that kind of greed, rather than actually pursuit of real, genuine interest at a societal level, but allowed that to be creamed off and captured by certain sectors in our society, and we let them get away with it. So that has to change, and that. So I'm going to take this point about neoconservatism head on, and thanks very much, Mark, for asking that. Sorry, I see Chris Alexander has a question. Please quickly, Chris, because then we want to come back to our panel, but do jump in now, and then I'm going to take that neocon point. And then we come back to our panel comments.
It's a quick comment. Fantastic remarks by all our panelists. Victory, unambiguously clear victory this year. That is the key to this agenda. The agenda won't exist without that victory. Second point, we cannot dance around this issue. We have to say that this matters with confidence. And with all due respect, there is no organization, there is no official forum, there are no governments inside of Ukraine, with a few notable exceptions, sitting to my right, and elsewhere in the Baltic states, and on the front lines, that have said this with confidence. And why is that? Not sufficiently well explained by analysts, by commentators, by political advisors, and we haven't overcome the fear. The Russians have injected over a century, perhaps, certainly since the Bolshevik Revolution, maybe before, fear at every level into our calculations about Russia. That has generated impunity. At Versailles in 1939, we declared war on Nazi Germany for invading Poland. We didn't declare war on the Soviet Union. There are reasons for that, but it contributes to this impunity. 1945, Hitler's former allies, they're treated as permanent founding members of the Security Council. 1991, we think this imperialist agenda has gone away. It hasn't. We are afraid of them, and so the impunity has grown. The fear needs to be overcome in one big jump. And then finally, we have to make the link to growth. We can't just say, we're going to fix taxes, we're going to have better hospitals. Oh, and by the way, we're going to win the war in Ukraine. The one agenda depends on the other. There will not be another round of European enlargement with benefits for all Europeans if there is a muddling through in Ukraine or a failure in Ukraine. Similarly, around the world, for North America, for Asian democracies, there will not be a larger space for trade, for prosperity, for deepened economic relations, unless democracies are in rude health, and they won't be unless we pass this test.
Victory, confidence, growth. That sounds like the beginning of 3 pillars of what can be a neo-idealist agenda going forward. Very clearly, thank you, Chris, for putting such a clear point on that. Indeed, linking these issues is part of the notion we've been trying to undertake, partly trying to actually understand how they link is the grand strategy element of this. Because indeed, there are objectives out there, but marshalling again all the means we need across the themes, as Martin said, across the countries, across the sectors of our societies, and getting all those noses pointing in the same direction is the way we're going to win this. So The question about neoconservatism has come up many times, and this was put very directly and very well. So what I want to say is this. Taking active measures and actively going out into the world to promote democracy does not equate invading Iraq. Same thing. There's so many layers between one and the other, so much that we can do, but also we've learned what we shouldn't do as well. We've learned how not to do that. If we haven't learned that lesson, then that is a wasted experience for us, because so much went wrong on the road to Basra and the road to Baghdad that we must learn that lesson. Otherwise, we really are doomed. I mean, it's no mystery as to why neoconservatism has a bad reputation, despite having many good sides. It's clear. It's in that history of the invasion of Iraq in particular, but also other related mistakes that were made. So one key difference with neo-idealism is defend democracy where it's threatened and make it that attractive beacon it deserves to be and it claims to be, in order to make it worth defending and to thrive. Don't impose democracy where it doesn't exist. It has to grow, it has to show, in order to then be supported. Supporting Ukraine to win, supporting Ukraine to the hilt is the paradigm neo-idealist case in this sense, whereas Iraq was a neoconservative case. But there are other differences too. Neo-idealism is a thoroughgoing liberal agenda on the social and cultural side as well, which doesn't fit with the neoconservatism of Daniel Patrick Moynihan, for example, that defining deviancy down, which was quite a strong, I mean, there was a strong conservative element to that doesn't speak to how the world has changed in terms of the tolerant and diverse societies we want to create. But at the same time, neo-idealism would reject the highly identitarian politics that we've seen liberalism tear itself apart with in many Western societies recently. So it is, in some way, there are many similarities, but there are also many differences. The other difference I would see, crucially, is disentangling from neoliberal economics. Neoconservatism was heavily tied up with neoliberal economics, both in its international and its domestic forms. We need to move away from that. We've seen that's been a highly damaging way of destroying parts of our own societies and destroying our societal resilience. So, but how to make that liberal neoliberal? How to actually take the good elements of growth, which we said we need, how to free our markets while also empowering our people. This is the silver bullet of current democratic politics. But I think that does significantly differentiate neo-idealism from neoconservatism, even though there is overlap. There's overlap on the security agenda, on saying, as Kurt Volker, a neoconservative, said, green light, grey zones are the green light specters. Absolutely clear. And I talk to a lot of neoconservatives, and we have a lot in common, but we also do differ on some things. But mutually learning is part of that this process, I think. Last thing for me on Taiwan. I fully agree, we have to hang with Taiwan as well. And this is why so many of the neo-idealists reacted so strongly against Emmanuel Macron's comments that seemed to put Taiwan in the position of 1938 Czechoslovakia, a faraway country of which we know little. How fantastic, how ridiculous that we should be putting on gas masks and digging trenches for some quarrel we don't understand in a faraway country of which we know little. That is unacceptable. As Foreign Minister Lipavsky said here in the Czech Republic, democracies have to hang together. When they're being bullied by authoritarian powers, we have to stick together with each other. And this, I think, is as clear a message of neo-idealism as you can find. It's born out of response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, but it goes much further than that too, and it goes further around the world. The response from Lithuania on this as well, very strongly taking a strong line on China, having an Indo-Pacific strategy, pushing forward for Taiwan, and encouraging investment on that basis. That is a neo-idealist position. Understand the interconnection again across sectors, but also across.
You know, it is investing in our defense to protect our values so that we are not seeing feet dragging on Ukraine anymore. This has a really big impact on Taiwan. The Chinese are, of course, watching what we do in response to Ukraine, thinking about their going forward. An invasion of Taiwan by the Taiwanese themselves is deemed high impact, low probability. But what can we do in between? And there were some good suggestions by Xander in our group about, you know, bringing Taiwan more into the fold in terms of cooperation on things like semiconductors and the economic realm. The rise of the far right in the West is really concerning. I'm not worried about the younger generation, but I think the thing that we discussed, which was quite poignant, was what is the responsibility of centre-right parties in this space to actually deal with the issue and not, again, take this sort of short-termist approach and move further to the right. because you will never beat them on that agenda. So where are the issues that centre-right and centre-left parties can really coalesce around to tackle some of those challenges? Because the answers aren't on the far right, they're further into the centre. And finally, yes, I mean, coalitions to fight corruption, but coalitions to work out what the future of our economies look like, the jobs transition, energy security, all of that. And I think that all fits within our realms.
Thank you so much, Martin.
To be very brief, I mean, like, we have common agreement here or common understanding. We are a little bit on the same board. However, we represent different countries or even different like sectors of where we work at. This is very important, and we should bring it forward, as it was said here. We must work together. We must support each other, and in the same way as we must support other democracies in their struggle in a new geopolitics. So, continuous support and strong support for Ukraine. Be prepared to support Taiwan in case that the situation is evolving. That's of course needed. And for our work, I would like to ask you to do your homework if possible. Like really, like think about it. We don't have to call each other neo-idealists. Doesn't matter. The concept itself is somehow what I can personally like somehow connect to, and in whatever you do in your work, in your institutions, like try to think about that there are the partners all over the Europe, even across the ocean. And I really hope that we gonna like take that kind of meetings and cooperation further. And for example, next year in Prague, we might be meeting here again and maybe like using the to-do list from today and using it and postpone it further, and hopefully like sort of saying that we did some kind of steps to deepen our activities and deepen our involvement and bringing democracies together.
That's right. And of course, we'll extend that invitation to Secretary General Kallas and her representative Landsbergis to come and join us at that time. Alexandra, please.
If we want to be successful, we have to work with people. Because I want to repeat, the problem is not just in that fact that in authoritarian countries, the space of freedom is shrinking to the size of the prison cell. The problem is that even in well-developed democracies, new generations vote for political forces who openly put into doubt the principle of Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Because these generations inherited their democracy, rule of law, and human rights from their parents. They're consumers of democracy, they're not producers of democracy. And that is why they don't understand the real value of these values. And maybe Ukrainian lessons learned to the whole world is that value matters. Democracy, rule of law, and human rights have significant impact to the life of people. To defend it.
Thank you, Alexandra. Paul Mason, please.
Yes, and it's an honour to be sharing the platform with you, Alexandra, on that. I came away from my last visit to Kiev just before the war incredibly inspired by the democratic transition of the mind that Ukrainian people had already begun to take. And it's that we are defending when we pursue a Ukrainian victory. On Taiwan, I will just say one thing. We in the West who want to defend democracy, we have an internal debate within our own ranks, and that is NATO first or China first. In the United States, this is a live issue. I think we need to do some convincing that Russia is the urgent, important threat over and above everything else. To the question, is neo-idealism neoconservatism? Well, I'm a radical left social democrat. But I no, I don't want to go back to a unipolar Charles Krauthammer world. I want a real multilateralism, and equally important for me, I use the phrase, the Karl Lowenstein's phrase from the 1930s. What is important is a militant democracy, a democracy that knows that it's here to defend itself. Sometimes there are parts of the Russian and Chinese ideological threat are spontaneous ideas that arise in our own societies, but a lot of it is a technique. A lot of it is foreign interference, and we need to ruthlessly counter it using statecraft, and more than what we're doing at the moment. I just finished by saying, I do believe that Ukraine's victory is possible. I believe Ukraine's victory is necessary for the well-being and self-interest of people in my own society. And therefore, it's just a mystery to me why so many politicians who claim to understand it are not actioning it. And I think that's where we need to go in the next 2 to 3 months. It's not how long it takes, it's whatever it takes.
Thanks very much, Paul. And I also, please, I appreciate making the emphasis that, neo-idealism can be a broad church. It can involve people from all kinds of political traditions. Benedetta, would you like to leave us with some final thoughts?
Sure. So I am still learning about what neo-idealism is and what it isn't, so I will not comment on that. But I think from the discussion I heard, it seems to me that it's ever more obvious that in a world of growing strategic competition, which is the world we live in, protecting our values and upholding them at home and in the international order is in our interest. It is a deeply strategic interest of ours to uphold our values. And I think that that's certainly the case, and you've all made this extremely eloquently in the case of Ukraine and why Ukraine must prevail as a sovereign independent country. That is essential for the security of the Euro-Atlantic area at large. But I think we shouldn't make dichotomous choices or false trade-off. It's not either or. We live in a world in which we don't have the luxury to actually focus on only one threat or one theater, one actor. We need to be able to say, we need to be able to recognize that security developments in the Indo-Pacific can and will have a direct impact on our security, that our theaters are interrelated. I think we need to be able at the same time to support Ukraine, to exercise its rights to self-defense, to counter authoritarian coercion, whether it comes from the PRC or from Russia, to call out and condemn Hamas terrorist attacks. It's not either or. It's all part of the same proposition of how we defend the free world. So I think it's very important that we understand that we're all on the same sides, and that's going to be a long and costly effort. But I think it is all related.
Thanks very much, Benedetta.
Thank you very much indeed, all of you, for drawing out different elements of what I think neo-idealism is, and indeed what it could be, as well as what it's not. But that process is a learning one for all of us, as it's supposed to be something that lives. It's like Alice was saying about democracy. This is a work in progress. It's a verb that we need to do and get at the task of doing. We're in the city of Václav, as someone said, who famously described Europe as a task. And I see this as a task before us as well, and we need to set to our work. But with such colleagues, it's a pleasure to do so, and it makes it much more tangible to me that we can do this. In terms of what Martin said about do we call ourselves this or not, and I've had a lot of questions on this, why the term neo-idealism? And part of this is Paul's version of idealism, when he said it's moving from where we are to where we want to be, which is a very basic definition, but believing that we can, and actually not accepting the hopelessness or the tragedy that is put to us by some, that we are merciless at the fate of impersonal globalized forces or of the forces of history or indeed human nature. And it is about that idea that we can strive to get beyond the conditions we find ourselves in order to actually act in all for the betterment of all of us. There's an element too about what I think is a fundamental human need and a fundamental human drive, which is to be part of something bigger than ourselves and thus ennoble ourselves by doing so and actually bring greater meaning and purpose to our own lives as well as those who we act together with. So there's a definite element of that there, as well as the idea of progress and keeping moving in its most basic sense. It's about our own work on ourselves to do so. Last thing would be to agree again with something that Paul said, actually. A distinction here with neoconservatism is not hegemonic in that sense, but it is in some ways about genuinely liberalizing and really internationalizing the liberal international order, which we know had many bonuses, many plus points, but it had many downsides as well. And this is why we don't get caught in the global south, because they know that was an order that was rigged against them. So actually taking on that, understanding that for all the good we made, there is so much we could have made better, and taking that from the way we are to the way we should be, is I think the task of neo-idealists, or those who would identify with that, even if they wouldn't call themselves as such. With that, I hand over to Aaron to close us out.
Okay, and actually, thank you very much to all of our panelists and for all of the questions, and to all of you for coming. Let me start by saying, to close us out, my name is Aaron and I am a neo-idealist. so let's just start with that kind of confidence to just declare ourselves as such. That may be the first step. So let's come quickly to a great little way of framing that we've now heard: victory, confidence, growth. Let's start with victory. I want to begin maybe with a warning coming off of what Thomas said about needing to defeat Russia by November 2024. We are being watched. right? Support for Ukraine has also come from faraway places, like Taiwan, because they know that what we do here matters and it sets a precedent. If we don't support Ukraine, and say what it is, this whole famous of, for as long as it takes, and we say what it is, the Russians will factor that into their future decisions, and the Chinese will factor that in to their future decisions. So let's say, first of all, what it is. It is victory, period, done. We need to get this right. The good news, I think, though, is that we do know how to do this. We've said this before, and Benedetta, you've talked a lot about the need for confidence and the will to implement strategy. We have those strategies. I mean, they are there. We have the strategies that allow us to win this democratic fight, and it is a fight. Oleksandra has brought up the point that this is systemic. I remember you said this morning, this is not simply a war or a struggle between one state and another. This is a struggle between two systems, right? And we need to be able to see it as such. We attack, and I think one of my the most poignant images for me, was right after the war started. Was Ukrainian parliamentarians taking pictures of themselves in the Rada saying the Rada is still working, period. And if the Ukrainians can do that, then the rest of us can I think, manage to do this. And I think it's easy by comparison. So let's go out of this with some confidence. Let's rediscover our boldness. We want secure, prosperous societies. Liberal democracy remains the best way to do this. We all believe that. That's why we're here. So let's go out and do it.
Thank you all. Drinks are served. Thanks, Thor.
Fantastic.
On us.